The women in our family gave more credence to what the priest would say than they did to their husbands or their brothers or their uncles. That's kind of the way they were brought up. I think it's partly fostered by the whole myth of the priest's purity and moral superiority, because they supposedly live this humble existence apart from the physical pleasures that the rest of the people indulge in.
These were the people that could walk on water. They were the authority figures, and whatever they said, we as little lambs would go. We knew nothing else.
The priest had the power to turn that host, that piece of bread and the wine, into the body and blood of Christ. And that was something none of us could do. I mean, that was the ultimate magic trick. It was this mystery that you were taking part of. And the priest was the guy who gave you access to that. It all reinforced that sense that these people have a power that we don't have, a direct line to God. That's why I wanted to be an altar boy. You actually handed them the water and the wine, and you were there when they were making this miracle happen. I remember wanting to be a priest. Early on, that's what I thought was going to happen.
Okay.
1964. Me and Billy Mahoney were the smallest kids in the first grade class and have to be the page boys in the May procession. I cried all day when they gave me that costume to take home. Paul's in high school now, but he's still an altar boy back at St. James. It's an Irish school. All the nuns and all the priests are Irish. Father McCormick and Father Birmingham are the youngest priests. They're not as scary as the old ones.
Birmingham, when he first showed up in Salem, was right around the time that the Vatican II was happening, and there were a lot of changes in getting rid of the Latin and the Mass. And he was young, and he was more of a liberal thinker, I'd say, than, the Monsignor O'Leary or Father Scrungy down at the Italian Church. He was given charge of the altar boys. Birmingham had this big, shiny black Ford Galaxy with red leather interior. I mean, it was cool. This young teenage kid in the 1960s, and here's this guy who pulls up in this big, black, shiny car. It was always waxed. I mean, that was my memory of it. We'd take groups of us for rides, and he was immediately very friendly and gathering us all around and saying, let's go to Hampton Beach, and let's go to the movies, and let's go to Boston. I remember he took us to see Juliet of the Spirits. And I remember he brought us to see a Pasolini film, the Gospel According to St. Matthew. He was taking you golfing and taking you to the beach and taking you on ski trips. They had to be covering for him saying Mass because he wasn't there to do it. He would have us come over to the rectory on Friday nights and Saturday nights and have pizza parties in the Monsignor's parlor. We'd sit around and watch TV and joke around and do whatever, And it was always a group of us, so I always felt real comfortable going into the rectory. It was like the clubhouse. Growing up, I don't know how many times the word sex was actually mentioned in our house. It just wasn't part of our environment. Those things weren't talked about. 14 and a half. I was at a Catholic high school taught by Xaverian brothers. I was pretty shy. I went out with girls a couple of times, but certainly didn't have sex with them at that age. Meanwhile, you're growing up and your hormones are kicking in and you're horny as crazy. Being as brainwashed as I was, I would actually tell him what I had done. Bless me, Father, I've sinned. It's been, 1 week since my last confession. And I lied 2 times. I talked back to my mother. I jerked off 43 times. He cut right through all the other sins and went right to that one and said, well, we need to talk about that, and, I'm going to give you forgiveness, but, what I want you to do is come see me in the rectory. You walked in, and there was an office. He's behind the desk, and I'm in a chair, and we discussed this problem. I remember him saying, it's kind of normal for boys your age, but it can be a real problem, and so we're going to have to work with this, and it was like this merry-go-round. You'd go to confession, you'd confess masturbation, and you'd have to go back to the rectory. By the 3rd time, I remember him standing up at the top of the stairs and saying, send Paul up. I remember going to the top of the stairs and sitting in the living room ahead of me, and I remember him saying, no, we're going to go to my room. I looked around the room, and all there was a bed and a bureau, maybe a chair. He says, what I think part of the problem is that you're too tense. So he says, lay down on the bed. He said, I'm going to give you a back rub. This will help you relax. And I don't know. He's the priest, He's got the hotline to God. He knows he's the guy who does the magic. He's everybody's friend. He's not going to hurt me or anything. I remember him rubbing my shoulders and then rubbing my back and then sort of sliding his hands under my shirt. And I thought, this is a little bit uncomfortable, but I still felt safe. I felt like, okay, this is what I get for being a sinner. He's trying to help me out. I believe it was the second time that he tried the back rub routine on me. It progressed beyond that. He started to undress me, and he started to, touch my penis, and he started, having me touch him, and then, he gets his clothes off, and he gets in bed, and he's naked, and he's got me masturbating. At that point, that's where the trauma kicks in, and you think, I'm not here. I couldn't possibly be here. This couldn't possibly be happening. The reason I've come for this counseling is now the thing that he's having me do to him, and he's doing it to me. And I just remember kind of staring at the ceiling. This was my first sexual experience. If it was nighttime, it was dark, and we'd drive around the streets. I'll have me jerk him off in the car. Or he'd bring me down to the youth center, and I remember down in the basement, and he would do it there.
I only saw him once.
Uh-huh.
He had a car, and he dropped Paul off in front of the house. I thought that was a beautiful thing, my son going out with a priest. We had no inkling what was going on.
Yeah.
I wish I did. But that was beautiful.
And then one weekend, I remember he took me away to go golfing, theoretically, down to the Cape. I remember this motel that he took me to. It was overnight. And Mom and Dad just thought it was normal. They never would have imagined that this was going on. They just would never enter their consciousness.
I thought it was a wonderful priest. Terrible what they did to my son. I always thought he was very, very quiet. Always very, very quiet, but I didn't think anything of it. Then when all that happened, then I came to. That's why he was so quiet, the poor kid.
I remember him saying, you don't tell anybody about this, because this is between us, and this is part of your penance and part of your counseling. I still had my paper route back then, and I'd deliver papers and go over to the rectory, get my counseling session, and then go home and try and act like nothing happened. Of course, I'd be shaking, and I'd be wanting to throw up. When you're totally wrapped up with this environment of sin, guilt, you internalize it yourself. At least I did. I decided it was my fault. There was something the matter with me. What did this mean? My whole attitude became to act like life was going as normally as possible. Mom would say, well, where were you? I'd say, well, I went over to the rectory to see Father Birmingham. And she thought that was normal. We were always hanging out there. I convinced myself as long as I didn't have an ejaculation, it wasn't even happening to me. He was ejaculating all over the place. I mean, he took me and 3 of my friends to the World's Fair. We stayed in a hotel in Manhattan. We were all in one room, and I remember there were 2 beds. He said, okay, you 2 get in that bed, and you 2 get in this bed, and then he got in between myself and whoever was on the other side of me. In the middle of the night, he started to roll over to my side and reaching into my pajamas. And I thought, you are not going to do this in front of my friends. I was able to break out of the trance, I guess, because it was now someone else is going to know about this. I remember that moment in that hotel room just pushing him aside, literally just pushing him aside and getting as far to the edge of the bed as I could. In my mind, that was the last time it happened. I remember sort of like drawing the line in my mind, you are not going to do this anymore.